And what was amazing was afterwards, she was the first athlete to came up to congratulate me. And she just said to me, I told you you'd have a good day. And that I find that really, really emotional that she did that.
Hello, I'm Chris, and thank you for listening to the My Defining Moments podcast, where a star of the sports world selects the 5 moments that define their career. And for this episode, I have a very special guest. She's a multiple Paralympic medalist, broadcaster, and member of the House of Lords, Tanni Baroness Grey-Thompson. Throughout her career as a wheelchair racer, Tanni won 16 Paralympic medals, 11 of which were gold. She won 13 world medals and 6 London Marathon titles. Since her retirement in 2007, she has become patron of numerous charities and has led the way into changing the lives of disabled people in the UK. So, lots to discuss. Let's find out what 5 defining moments have been chosen by Tanni Grey-Thompson. So, hi Tanni, thank you very much for joining me on My Defining Moments. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being a guest. It's really great to have you on. We've got a lot to discuss and you've given me 5 great moments to get into. So I just want to start literally at the beginning. How was your childhood growing up in Wales?
It was really good. I've got an older sister who... Actually, this could have been one of my defining moments where she decided she didn't like the name I was christened and just decided to call me something entirely different, which is how I ended up being called Tanni. But I was born with spina bifida. I could walk a little bit when I was young. And then basically I'm missing some vertebra at the back of my spinal cord. And I became paralysed, I don't know, about the age of 6-ish. I mean, I could never walk well. But certainly by the age of sort of 7, I was a wheelchair user. And actually, you know, for me, having the wheelchair was a massive amount of freedom because I could probably only walk a few metres before I'd fall over, where with the chair, I could kind of do everything that I wanted to do. So whereas a lot of people saw the chair as something that was inherently negative, for me, the wheelchair enabled me to do the things that I wanted to do. So, I guess because I don't know any different, that's just sort of the experience I had. But I guess it was relatively whatever normal is in a lot of ways in terms of how my family brought me. I was just brought up to be, you know, the same way that my sister was, which was to get on with things and to, you know, my parents didn't wrap me in cotton wool, which I think was quite important too.
Your first defining moment is going to a mainstream school aged 11. I mean, that must have been a very big moment for you.
So, yeah, I mean, I started off in mainstream school and then when I became paralysed, I should have been sent to a special school. And my head teacher, an amazing man, Mr. Dewi Thomas, didn't tell the local education authority that I was a wheelchair user. And so I was able to stay in my primary school. And then I was due to go, well, I thought I was going to go to the same school that my sister was at. And then we had a letter from the head teacher which said, we don't take people like Tanni at our school. And then that started quite I guess quite a long process in terms of my parents were educated and, you know, watched the news and knew that there was someone called Baroness Mary Warnock, who had done a lot of work on education for children with special educational needs and knew that she'd done a green and white paper on it and then got hold of a copy of it. And then kind of started the process where my dad threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to a mainstream school, which was quite cool at the time. And I remember my dad giving me these papers and saying, you need to read them. And it was like, what? And then, you know, 30 years later, it sort of now forms part of my life, reading these white and green papers. But my parents were massively persistent and really pushed hard because I didn't need a different education. I needed a physically accessible education. So for me, yeah, that was huge because I think as an athlete, you need to be educated. You don't need to shed loads of GCSEs, but what you need is to understand how the world works and understand contracts and media and you know, for me, a really big part of that was as an education really helped my career.
And how do you feel like schools are today? Like, are they better equipped for people with disability? Has it improved a lot since your day?
I still deal with education cases where disabled children are excluded from mainstream school or excluded from an education that's right for them. So some things have got better and some things haven't. So I think that's a real shame that we should all be looking at what's right for every child. And not every child develops at the same point. This is true in education and sport. We have to find some way of, putting children into bands, and we do it by age group. But, it all is quite variable. So in some ways, I think there's still a lot of challenges for disabled children to get a good education.
And for you personally, when did sport enter your life? When was that like an option for you?
So I did a lot of physical activity when I was young. My parents were both very interested in sport, and I think my parents saw it as something that was really positive in terms of just being physically active and strong enough to get around. And so I swam and I did some horse riding and all sorts of things. And then when I went to high school, I started taking sport more seriously. But it was the age of 12 that I started wheelchair racing. And I'll be honest, I just thought it was really boring until I tried it, because I thought, well, you just go around in circles. What do you want to do that for? And then I tried it and it was like, wow, this is amazing and I love it. And every decision I made after that was based on, just trying to be an athlete, just trying to, find a club and a coach and a training group. And I was lucky that I think, as a young athlete, I wasn't seen as talented. So I didn't have lots of pressure on me at a very young age. I had time to develop and learn the sport and kind of have a bit of freedom, really. And I guess, people only saw me as talented when I was probably 20, 21. So I think for me that was very positive, that I just could, get on with what I wanted to do and develop a love of it. Because if you want to be good, you have to love it, because there's loads of times where it's really boring or miserable or hard. And, you need to, you need something that keeps you going through that. So, I was very lucky. I had some amazing support from Bridgend Athletics Club. My first coach, a guy called Roy Anthony, they were absolutely amazing.
And just moving on straight to your second defining moment, which was the realisation that basketball wasn't for you. Why was that? Well,
I just loved it. It was amazing, and it was kind of fast and dynamic and, quite, it's non-contact, but it was kind of quite a lot of contact. And that was what I wanted to do. That was, I wanted to play basketball for GB. And then I kind of knew that I wasn't really improving or any good. I couldn't throw, catch or shoot, which is a problem. But also I got selected for a school team, and I basically got fouled off for fighting. So we played in mixed teams back then, and there was an older boy who kept elbowing me in the bicep, and it really hurt. And I lost my temper and I hit him right in front of the referee. And the ref said to me, you can't do that. And I was like, okay, sorry. And he said, you can't punch people. And I was like, well, my hand was open. I slapped him. And I went, oh, no, I can't do that either. So, it was sort of funny. I can't believe that I tried to defend it by saying, no, I didn't actually punch him. I only slapped him. And he was like, I think he was about 15, and I'm this skinny little kid, and I didn't even hit him hard. That's still no excuse. But yeah, it was people around me said, look, go and do wheelchair racing because you can't get close enough to anyone to hit them. Because I think if it hadn't have been for that, I think I would have kept trying to play basketball. And I might have developed, but I actually don't think I'm not the right size to play basketball. I've got very, very long arms, but got a really short body because of my scoliosis. So I just wouldn't have been the right type of player to make GB.
So when was the moment when obviously you switched to athletics and you were enjoying that? Was there ever a moment when you actually did realise that this could be a career, or the Paralympics were a realistic possibility for you?
It's something I aspired to from being sort of 14 years old. And, by then I'd watched the London Marathon on TV and decided I was going to do that, which I did. A few years later, I'd heard about the Paralympics in '84 that were in Stoke Mandeville. And, I think sort of, I wasn't thinking of Seoul as my first Paralympics, because of my age. I was thinking, the one after that. But then actually I got selected for Seoul. I was one of the last athletes to be selected. It was like, give her an opportunity to see what she does. And, I went there, I won a bronze. And for me, that was just, kind of amazing, actually. It just really made me realise this is what I wanted to do. And also I think, I was at university by that point. I'd just come to my end of my first year. I was at Loughborough, and it was like, okay, right, this is what I've done to get here. And I've won a bronze. What do I have to do now? And also, there's a lot of luck in the timing. So, I was due to graduate the year before Barcelona. So I knew I had a kind of a year to travel. So training was good at Loughborough, but what I didn't have the opportunity to do was do as many races, international races, as I wanted. So, it just gave me a boost at a really important time.
Yeah, you mentioned you won a bronze medal in Seoul. What was that Paralympics like? I mean, compared to, obviously it's grown a lot since, but that first one you went to, what was it like?
It was amazing. I mean, the sort of local organising committee packed the stadiums full of people. There weren't people buying tickets, but people were basically encouraged to go and watch. So yeah, it was amazing. And I was 19 in a completely different country from anything I'd ever experienced before. Culture, food. There was, obviously, there were a lot of riots pre-Olympics. And kind of some tension in the city. And I think for me, what was always important wherever I went, you tried to spend some time learning about because you don't always have a lot of time to stay and visit. And I think it just opened my eyes to lots and lots of different things that I didn't see growing up in Cardiff. And it was a pretty special, and no pressure. Again, it's just, 4 years later going into Barcelona, it's a totally different place that I was in. I was world record holder, world number one. Probably I had more time to enjoy Seoul than I had in any of the other games that I went to. But, so much is luck about the year that you're born, whether you fit into the Paralympic cycle or not.
Yeah, so you mentioned Barcelona, and that was, like you say, you went from being just the underdog and the bronze medalist to then suddenly being the world record holder and the favourite. And it went pretty well. I mean, 4 gold medals and 1 silver in the relay. It was totally dominant in the 1, 2, 4 and the 8. How was Barcelona as a games? Was it held well, and your personal experience of winning those medals?
Yeah, Barcelona was great. I mean, I think it helped that the Olympic team did well. So, that set a really sort of quite positive vibe, because it was on an easy time difference to watch. So I think a lot of journalists kind of thought, okay, we could go back out for the Paralympics. Really good spectator support in the evening sessions, pretty full stadiums, people who bought their tickets. And that felt really good to be in front of a crowd that wanted to be there for that season. So 91, I had a big jump in performance. 92, I was breaking world records. It was just one of those moments in time where you just went race to race. And because there was an expectation on me from the team to do well, but probably not from anyone else. So that's probably some of the least pressure that I've personally felt going into a games. Because actually, if I'd come away with 2 golds and a silver, or 1 gold and a silver, or 4, whatever it was, if I'd come away with more than I'd won in Seoul, then that would have been seen as a success.
And obviously after that, you came back and you're great success. You're a bit of a name now, and I guess in the UK, we did obviously take, like you say, we took note because of the great Olympics that we had, and then the Paralympics was also a great success for Britain. And did it feel like the Paralympic sport in the UK was building a bit of momentum then, leading up to Atlanta?
That was a real turning point, because Helen Rollason had come out from the BBC and she was a presenter at Grandstand, so they were covering the games, and Blue Peter were covering it, and it was in the papers, and there's journalist Gareth Davis from the Telegraph, he was there covering stuff, and it felt like this moment in time for the Paralympics. There was a half-hour programme a couple of weeks after the Seoul Games, which was a bit sort of patronising, and it felt like suddenly people were seeing us as athletes, and talking about us doing sport, not about, oh, aren't they brave and marvellous. Unfortunately, we've slipped a bit back into that, but hopefully that's just kind of part of the cycle. So and Seoul was the first games that sat alongside the Olympics. Then we had Barcelona, and then really from then on, you kind of realised that the games were going to have to sit alongside each other in the same city. And that felt quite an exciting moment in time as well.
And how was, from your point of view, the lead up to Atlanta in terms of your training and your results? Were you happy? Were you in good shape going into those games?
Yeah, I was in the best shape of my life going into Atlanta, and had been able to do a lot more road racing, and had really consolidated a lot of my weaknesses that I saw in sport. And so the expectation on me from the team was I was going to win 4 golds, and that was what I was, that was what I was aiming for. And then when the games happened, I won a gold and 3 silvers in, the 100, 200, 400. There was someone who was quicker than me, and there is nothing you can do about that. And it was quite mixed emotions for me at the games, if I'm honest, because I was going the quickest I'd ever done. I was breaking personal bests. In the 200 semi-final, Leanne Shannon, who went on to win the gold, broke the world record. Then I broke the world record. But then in the final, she went quicker than me. I think we both went slower in the final, which quite often happens. But, personally, I was the best I'd ever been, but it didn't relate to medals. And then, this was another defining moment for me, because I think when you don't meet people's expectations, that's when you learn who your friends are. And for me, that was a massively important moment in my career, learning about who genuinely cared about me, who cared about what I wanted to do next. I had a lot of people tell me, you should retire because you're not any good anymore. And the people around me who I cared about and, were saying, like, do you want to stop? What do you want to do? And, we made the decision that regardless of whether I got selected again or not, I wasn't ready to retire. But that was quite hard, because it didn't feel like people were looking beneath the... I mean, medals matter, because that's what the medal table is about. But people didn't necessarily see that I'd still made this massive improvement in the 4-year cycle. So, you can't regret anything like that, because actually what I learned from Atlanta just held me in really good stead for the rest of my career. And the one thing I do remember is there were 2 planes coming back from Atlanta, and one of the managers had decided to call the first one back the winner's plane and the second one back the loser's plane. Great. I mean, apparently to motivate us. And originally I was due to be on the winner's plane, then I got demoted to the loser's plane, and then this person came up to me and said, "Oh, well, you're back on the winner's plane." I was like, great, actually. And apparently I didn't appear as excited as I should have been. But I remember at that point, I was like, 26, and thinking, actually, do you know what? This is not a way to treat. And I guess this is where a lot of the work I do now, my passion about duty of care and athletes. No athlete goes to a games to do badly, But it was just one of those moments where it although it was hard and difficult, it was really positive for the rest of my career.
Yeah, that is the third defining moment of your career, was that level of expectation that you had, and how you say you taught you who your friends were. Was it really that bad when you got back here? Was the reaction the same, or was it slightly different when you went back to your club? Because you still, like you say, you still won 4 medals, and you still broke a world record. Yeah, it got broken again, but not many people who break a world record in the championships will then be told, "Oh, maybe you should retire."
No, I mean, I think the reaction from my club and everyone else was just like, yeah, you did really well. It was okay. It's not the medals you might have wanted, but actually they looked beneath the medals. So actually it was quite funny. So having been told I should retire, I did lots of stuff. I got to be on Question of Sport, and I got to do lots of, actually as an athlete, that's still quite a cool thing to do. So in terms of how the public saw me, they didn't see me as a failure. They just saw it as a sporting moment. And, that was... that is sport. You have no right to win. There is no automatic right to do anything, and if you're beaten by people fair and square, that is it. I mean, not great at the time, but, you just put it into context of everything else. So I think pretty much everybody else, apart from a couple of team managers, were really cool about it. And again, that probably dropped me out of the team spotlight for a bit, to actually just go, okay, what am I going to do? And it made me not more determined, but I'm going to be in control of my destiny here. So I took far greater responsibility for my coaching, and then led my programme, brought in the coaches that I wanted to work with, changed quite a lot in what I was doing. And I think that suited me as well. I am just like a bit of a control freak. And I think for me at that stage in my career, it was like, okay, I need to take complete ownership of everything I do. And, that if Atlanta had been a bit better, I probably wouldn't have done that. And I think actually at that point in my career, I needed to do it to make the next step into the next games.
Yeah, I think there is a reason for everything, and that obviously, like you say, that was obviously a kind of the kick that you didn't know you needed, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of Atlanta as a game as a whole, compared to Barcelona, it must have felt like a bit of a step backwards, didn't it?
Yeah, Atlanta wasn't great. I mean, when we moved in, because I've been to the Olympics, because I competed in 4 demonstration races at the Olympics, so I'd been there during the games. I'd stayed in the village. And then when the Paralympic teams moved in, they were like dismantling the village around us. And there's an international zone where, there's kind of shops and things. So, you can buy toothpaste or you don't have to go outside. And that was taken away, and the food wasn't great and the accommodation wasn't great. And nobody really came to watch us. There were days in the stadium where we used to joke where you could, practically name the crowd because you kind of knew them. You'd be like, all right, that's Leanne's mum and dad. That's my dad and sister. And, and so it was hard because you kind of felt... we felt like an afterthought, if I'm being really honest. I think even shocked me at that point was that, I'd raced in the States a lot, and road racing had quite a high profile, and, American athletes had full academic scholarships at university, and you had the American with Disabilities Act, which was really strong, and there was coverage of like the big city marathons, and then they didn't get the Paralympics. And I think part of that was that there was a separate organising committee for the Games, and I think it was hard to just do the negotiations and make stuff happen, and then the weather wasn't great. There was quite a lot of rain. Mind you, there was a lot of rain in Sydney as well, which you kind of forget about. But it was all, and also the atmosphere was different because the Olympic team had won a single gold with Redgrave and Pinson. So the Olympic team didn't have a great time, and there was problems with transport, and so we're not linked, and you don't kind of go into a games going, oh, well, if the Olympics didn't have a great time, it's bad for... Because you don't think about it like that. But the atmosphere just felt very different and quite hard, to be honest. And it just didn't feel like... People had tried really hard, but it just didn't feel like it was organised to the kind of the same standard that Barcelona had been.
And obviously, was there conversation at the time of maybe, there is now of like merging the Olympics and the Paralympics? And I know that the Commonwealth Games in 2022, there's going to be a lot more para events there. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it works really well for Commonwealth Games because I don't think it's possible to have a separate Games because in terms of sports development, that there's a lot more that needs to be done in a lot of countries around the world. So I think for Commonwealth, it's great. I don't think for Olympics and Paralympics it would necessarily work because the games would be too big. You can't combine the two games because then you'd have 16,000 athletes in a month of competition. Or what would happen was events would be cherry-picked from the Paralympics to put into the Olympics. And, I'd kind of think that, maybe basketball and tennis and wheelchair racing might be those events, but... then it just dumps a whole pile of other disabled people that says, okay, you have nowhere to go anymore. So for me, it kind of works. I mean, there's always been a debate about whether we should have the Paralympics first. I think the Olympics should be first because the city has to be ready for the Olympics. The Paralympics cannot be used as a test event for the Olympics. And, one of the things I said to someone, probably in about 2009, 2010 is like, oh yeah, the Olympics are the warm-up event for us. And then actually that appeared in an advert somewhere, which is quite funny. So I take the credit for that. But, it's I think it works okay. There's more we can do in terms of TV coverage, globally. There's a lot more we need to do in terms of athlete development and opportunity. But I think the two games works okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think like you say, I think having the Olympics first, and then like as you saw in London, it was like the billboard was saying thanks for the warm up, and then it was onto the Paralympics. Yeah. And I think for fans as well, I think when the Olympics is so great, and when it finishes, you're like, oh no, what's next? And then it's like, oh wait,
another one,
Paralympics, and then it's exactly. It's almost worse when the Paralympics end, I think, because you're just like, oh no, it's all finished.
London was like that, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, completely. Just speaking of home games, 1998, the World Champs were in Birmingham. What was that like for you, competing in front of a home crowd?
It was good. I mean, I was living in Birmingham at the time, so it was really nice to have my whole family there. So my mum hated watching me race, and she'd declined to come to either Barcelona or Atlanta because she's just like, I can't cope with it. I don't want to be there. And actually for me that was really good, because I remember at the time people going, oh, doesn't your mum want to watch? It's like, no, it's just, I know at least if she's home and she's, you know, where she is, that's all right for me. And she used to get so stressed out. So yeah, that was kind of nice to be, you know, just compete in front of GB crowd, and, you know, actually on the track that I trained at, you know, and sort of staying at the university. So it's kind of quite interesting now, you know, we've got the Commonwealth Games in 2022, where they'll be using the university accommodation, the same track, and it's going to be interesting to go back and see the changes between our World Championships and the Commonwealth in terms of what they're doing in the city. So yeah, I mean, I was lucky I got to compete at, like, London Marathon, Great North Run, you know, massive races on home soil. But I didn't often get to compete in big track meets on home soil. And there is something very different racing on the road to racing on a track.
And how important do you think those road races are? Because I think often they were the only time we saw like wheelchair racing was in the London Marathon, Great North Run, and that coverage has been for you know 20, 30 years now, and it's always been a centre point, and it still is now. And how important is that for the sport?
It's really important, and you know, there's still a lot of people who know me more for the London Marathon than maybe for some of the stuff that I did on the track. And you know, London Marathon, Great North have been pivotal in terms of pushing and helping support wheelchair sport and wheelchair racing develop, which is fun. I mean, I think the one shame that's happened at the moment is that in the UK, a lot of the wheelchair races have moved to only doing track, not doing road. So we used to have a road race Grand Prix, 12 races a year, which has sort of disappeared off the calendar. And that's a bit of a shame, but it kind of always hopeful that something like that would come back. Certainly for me, it developed me massively as an athlete racing on the road, because you just learn different tactics, different stamina. You know, as a sport, we're like cycling, we're not like running. So you can do a half marathon and an 800 metres. And, you know, it doesn't hurt in the same way as it does a runner. So for me, it's actually when I started road racing, that's when I really improved as a track athlete.
Yeah, a lot of people say it's obviously is similar to cycling. Did you ever train with any cyclists, or were you always training with like track athletes?
So within my club, I always trained a lot of the time. Trained with an athletics club and trained with runners on the track, because you can set up a session where you can train together. I used to train with a 400 metre runner, and you know we got to know. You know, 'cause my build up to my top speed took longer, so we got to know, you know, how far he needed to let me go before he started running, and you know, so there's things that you can do quite well. On the road, you know, we're so much quicker than runners that you just can't train, and we train on the road, you know, with the traffic, so you can't train with runners in that way. And then kind of cyclists. So my sister used to cycle with me, and I trained with cyclists, but not kind of competitive cyclists, because we don't have gears on the chair. We're sort of stuck in between running and cycling, but. I used to train with other wheelchair racers, and I quite like training on my own. I never minded training on my own, because I could just kind of get on with what I needed to do.
And then training was going well before 2000 Sydney Paralympics. Did that feel like a bit of a moment again for the Paralympics, because it seemed to be quite well received? But how was that as a games as a whole?
It was interesting sort of leading up to Sydney, because at the very beginning when Sydney won the Olympics, there wasn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for a Paralympics. And, you know, it was a bit of a slow burn, and you had some amazing Australian athletes and people who pushed it. But by the time the Games came around, it was sort of in a different place. So, you know, Louise Savage, who's most successful Australian track and road athlete, you know, she was on Neighbours. You know, and it was like, wow, okay. I mean, I don't know if that's a mark of whether you've made it or not. But, you know, it was good. It was difficult because the crowd support wasn't huge. But I think that's around, actually, it was just really expensive for people to get there. And it was kind of difficult for people to get there. So the games themselves were you know, well organised. The food, the accommodation, the timetable, everything worked out well. But there were some bumps in the road to get to that point. And it was the first time there was daily coverage back in the UK on the BBC. And it was all around sort of tea time. And it was put in that slot for a couple of reasons, actually, partly because of the time difference, which is always a challenge, but also it was about, bringing in a new audience, educating young people, maybe, helping young people to grow up without some of the prejudices about disability sport. And actually it was a good time, people coming home from work, rather than maybe having a morning programme where a lot of people couldn't see. People would come home and stick it on when they came in from work. And it was a really interesting reaction coming home in terms of just the number of people that stopped me saying, I saw you on TV. And that was on an individual level, it was nice. But also I think in terms of how the team moved on as well, that was, it was really well received back in the UK. And then, for me, there were a couple of moments. So sports personality as an athlete's a big thing. And I remember my sister ringing me saying, you're on the advert for Spotty this year. Like, there's a clip of you on the advert. I go, oh. And then I got onto the shortlist, which was 6, and he's like, I'm on the shortlist. And then on the night, I came third. And it's mostly remembered because there wasn't a ramp to get me on stage. And people say to me, what did you think at the time? It's like, I've got a sports personality trophy. That's, you don't train because of that, but you go, I've got a sports personality trophy. And so for me, that was a massive turning point. What was really sweet, actually, was that in the immediate aftermath of the show, quite a significant number of people rang into the BBC to say, why couldn't Tanni get on stage? And I know the people who were involved, it was a genuine oversight. They just hadn't thought. But that then changed a lot of things internally. They brought in a person whose job was to get disability sport on TV and radio, and they redrew a lot of their guidelines about contributors and a lot. And it's really fun. Even now, I go places and people go, we've got a ramp. We're like, okay, good, thanks. So it's kind of funny who remembers it. But so yeah, as an athlete, that was a real high point in my career.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that sports personality, because even though like you say it was an oversight and it was, someone just probably did forget, but at the same time, like you say, it's completely changed it because so many people saw it. It was on such a big stage that it did, like you say, open people's eyes, and we're all watching it thinking, oh, what's happened here? And then it just shone a light on something that not many people would have thought about.
No, and speaking to people afterwards who were in the gallery who were, producing the programme, as my name was read out, there was a bit of a sort of moment where they're going, there is no ramp. And I always feel really sorry for Alan Shearer because he's standing there with the trophy. I mean, it's not funny because I'm going, what do I do? And the studio was really quite dark, and there was a massive chunk of the Paralympic team there. And I was sitting like second or third row, and there's just all these like wheelchair users, but you couldn't really see anyone's face. And you're thinking the poor thing that, that moment of panic for him. But you know what? It kind of is what is, it's not, to me, it wasn't horrific because the good stuff that came out of that was worth it. And sometimes in those moments, things change because of that moment in time, and the stuff that came out of it was that it might have taken us another 10 years to get to that point. So kind of thank you to the guys that didn't build a ramp.
And just speaking of your performance in Sydney, it was 100% success. Entered the 4 events, 1, 2, 4 and 8, and 4 gold medals. It couldn't have gone any better, surely.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, they were just those races that, everything fell into place in terms of training. And I remember it's about 10 weeks before Sydney, and I was at a training camp in France, and I'd gone out training one day and I was just completely flat. There was nothing, I could barely push. And I remember just thinking, what's happened? And you just get these sort of blips and moments, and I took sort of 2 days off and then started back training again, and it all just slotted back into place again. But it was one of those moments that doesn't always happen in the career, where you just stuff clicked into place. I liked competing at big events, and I think for me that was part of me as well. Just a big event, I could push myself really hard, but I remember just at the end of that just being completely and utterly exhausted, just completely wiped out, and my sister and her husband were there, and our celebration was actually a big bowl of chips. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? And I remember just sitting there in my sister's hotel, just being completely wiped out, but it was a good feeling.
Well, nothing wrong with a big bowl of chips after you've worked so hard.
Yeah.
And then just moving on to your fourth defining moment, which was the following year when you gave birth to your daughter Caris. I mean, that was obviously being a mum's amazing, but how was that pregnancy for you? Because was it a little bit tricky at your first scan?
I'd kind of got to the point where I was like 31, I think 31, and you're thinking, we can have a family. And then you suddenly start thinking, actually, I'm kind of running out of time as a woman. And then how do I fit in another games? Because I was kind of had the idea I wanted to try and do 5 games if I could. So we actually, we had a cut-off date for being pregnant. And that was sort of, a big decision as a female athlete to start a family. Yeah, but then I went for my first scan, and I was offered termination because somebody said to me, people like you shouldn't have children. And it was like, okay, thanks for that. So I changed hospitals. And somebody said to me, oh, you can't just change hospitals. Yeah, I can. Don't worry about it. And, I'm quite stubborn and resilient. And it was like, don't make a decision about me just because I'm a wheelchair user. And, someone said to me, oh, did you think about being pregnant? Yeah, as a female athlete. Yeah, you do. And it was hard, I was really sick the first couple of months before people knew I was pregnant. So there was a bit in the middle where I actually looked pregnant, and rather than someone thinking I'd just been eating a lot of biscuits, and you go, oh, this is lovely. And then I'll be honest, the last 2 months were really hard. I've lost about 10 inches in my spine because of my scoliosis. So Caris always seemed to manage to kick me underneath my diaphragm, which was good. But it was amazing. And I was, I'd never really held a baby till I had it. And I was one of those people who was like, well, having a baby's not going to change my life. How difficult can it be? Like, I'm an athlete. And then when you have a baby, you go, what? And I just remember being so tired and exhausted. And I'll tell you, there was one night I breastfed her for about 5 months. And because of training, I was back in training quite quickly. And then breastfeed, I remember just eating loads. And waking up one night, feeding her and eating a whole packet of ginger biscuits because I was starving, and then put her back down to sleep, and then woke up the next morning and realised she was kind of covered in bits of ginger biscuit because I've never experienced anything quite like it. But it's hard because, when she was little, she travelled the world with us. She went on a training camp to Spain when she was 10 days old. She was in Athens when she was 2.5. She went to Beijing. She thought when she was very little that that's just what kids did. She thought kids travelled the world and went to different tracks around the world. But what's amazing about the community of wheelchair racing is, quite a lot of people have families, or, there's loads of people that really well. So I'd take her to a race on the track and someone would say, all right, I'll look after her while you do the 800 metres. And you go, right, okay, stay with the Swiss squad for a bit. And actually, there was one race I remember doing back in the UK, and not a big one, but a very, very safe environment. And someone was looking after Caris. I was doing a 400 metres, and I was probably away from her for, it was minutes, because I did my warm-up, and I did and the race is less than a minute, and I came back and she's got an ice cream. I said to her, where did you get the ice cream? And she sort of pointed to one of the officials who I'd known since I was 12. And I went over and I said, oh, that's really sweet of you to buy her an ice cream. No, thank you. And he said, oh, we walked past and we said, hi, Caris, how are you? And apparently Caris said, Mummy's always busy with wheelchair racing and she hasn't got time to buy me an ice cream. And they went and bought her an ice cream. And then by the end of that day, because we were racing back to back, she'd had like 3 ice creams. So I had to go to the officials at the end of the day and say, do not feel guilty. She, she's just playing you. And they were like, yeah, we know. But, there's kind of lots of happy memories like that. It's really sweet. But it was, yeah, it's hard. Just there's no manual that comes with being a mum. And that's the hard bit.
And you mentioned there that you were on a training camp 10 days after she was born. Was it that quick for you to get back into training?
Yeah, at that point, I could only train 3 times over 2 days. We had Commonwealth Games that year in Manchester, 2002, and I really, really wanted to compete at Commies. And, I had 6 months. I actually thought I was going to have her a little bit earlier than I did. But but I had her at 38 weeks, which is, I mean, obviously it's like the best thing for her. But it was always part of the plan all the way through that I would get back into training as soon as I could, and get back competing, because as an athlete, it felt like my time was running out. And, you know, I think at that point I knew that I had Athens in me as a games, but that was it. You know, at Athens I was done. That was me. I mean, I competed for another 2 years to make sure I was done. But going into Athens, I knew that I couldn't not do another cycle.
And how was it being a mother training again? Was there anything different? Did you have to learn different ways of training? Did your body change or anything like that? Was it that drastic?
Yeah, I mean, there were changes, you know, in terms of you know, as an athlete, pre-children, you know, you can sort of go, oh, you know, I'll leave it half an hour because I'll wait for the rain to move over. And then, you know, when you're feeding your child, you can't go, no, I need to go now. So it changed some things. It made me very focused. My body did change. So I really, you know, I changed the way I raced. So that there were some things with the racing chair. So we don't have gears. It's basically a fixed gear. It's the relationship between the sides of the pusher and the wheel. And I had to make quite a lot of changes to the technology that I used. But also I enjoy that side of things. What it did was I had to go to a much bigger gear on my push rims, and that changed the way I was able to race. So for like the 800, I could only time trial it. I couldn't do a tactical race. I had to time, and actually it turned out in Athens I didn't do that. I messed it up. But it changed a lot of things. But also it's part of the evolution, you know, as an athlete, that you've got to try things and do things in a different way all the time. And I think having Caris just made me appreciate a lot of things that I had. And also it was that point where it was just good to think about other stuff. You know, being an athlete is quite selfish, where you don't really have to think about anybody but yourself, and then, you know, suddenly you do.
And how is Caris now? What's she up to these days? Is she studying anywhere?
Yeah, she's at university, so she's gone to uni straight into lockdown. And so, it's a really weird and difficult time for a lot of people. So, not the kind of the freshest week that she was expecting. So actually, this was pre-lockdown for her. She sent me a text message, which was so funny because she kind of quite likes to sleep. So she sent me a message at 9:00 on a Friday saying, me and my flatmates are going out. And it's like, wow, Caris, that's amazing. Where are you going? And she's like, Tesco's. So it's like, yeah, that's not what most students normally do on a Friday night. But anyway, there you go. But she's good. I mean, it's challenging because she was a day old when I had my first phone call to say, do you think she's going to be an Olympian? And I was like, I have no idea. Like, seriously. And she has a lot of that through her life. It's so much pressure on her. She deals with it really well. I kind of have a lot of parental guilt over it. And also, you know, since I've been in politics, people have come up to her and said, you know, can you tell your mum she's a rubbish politician? You know, and, you know, I just think, well, you know what, tell me, like, keep your kids out of it. I think if you've got grown-up children and you're a politician and they choose to go into politics, okay, but not children, you know, just, it's got nothing to do with her. And I think one time that it happened, she, you know, she's quite sassy. She just went, oh, that's not my mum. So, and walked off. I think she's about 7. But yeah, it's hard because, you know, if you don't like me, don't tell my child. You know, just that is not a way for anybody to behave.
And you said that you took her to Athens in 2004. That was a bit of a mixed bag for you, those champs. Like you say, you started with the 800 metres, and I remember watching your post-race interview, and you said it was the worst 800 metres you've ever done, and that was the worst time to do it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was awful. So because the changes I had to make, the only way I had a chance of winning the race was I had to go to the front and time trial it. And we'd spent 2 years trying lots of other options, and that was the only way that I had a chance of winning. And just had a great semi-final. And then in the final, as we were about to break, I decided to drop to the back of the pack. No idea why I did that. It was one of those things that you just go, oh, I don't know. And there's lots of races where you go in with a race plan, you change mind and you do something different. You read the moment. And I didn't think I'd had a great start, which is why I decided to sit in the pack and just get, you know, a bit of a breather and then kick again. And then I found I put myself in a position I couldn't get out of. And that was pretty much, worst time that season, worst 800. Like, I came off the track in the interview. You know, the guys at the trackside, they're doing their job. You know, they have to ask really tough questions. And, you know, Ian was there and he was my coach. And he was like, what are you doing? I was like, I don't know. And I remember crying a lot. And then we watched back the race. And I'd actually had a really decent start. That's the bit I read wrong. And I don't know. I mean, just, you can't change it. The hard bit, well, I mean, my family were really upset and disappointed, and the hardest part was going back into the village. And because I've been an athlete for so long, I knew lots of people from different sports. And if you do well, you're lucky if your teammates go, that's all right. You know, there's not a lot of feedback to it. And I remember coming back to the village and just people from like my sport and other sports coming going, are you all right? I'm like, no, I'm not all right. And it was like, I was really stupid. And I remember one of the men's basketball team who I'd known since I was like 15 just came over. And I wouldn't say he was probably very demonstrative normally and would probably more take the mick out of me than... And he just came over and kind of threw his arms around me and just gave me this big hug and said, like, you know, we still love you. I was like, that doesn't help right now. So that was hard because you just go, I've just... let people down. But, one bad race doesn't make you a bad athlete. It was bad. It was kind of defining. I mean, this could have been another defining moment. It was what it was. People, make mistakes. You just... Then, bizarre, I mean, my 100 is my weakest event. I came back and won the 100. And that was probably... If I had to pick one race in the whole of my career, it would be the 100 because that was the most technically perfect race I've ever done. Yeah, and I crossed the finish line. I looked slightly demonic, but for me, that was really huge moment for me.
Yeah, I watched that 100-metre back last night, actually, just to remind myself, and that looks like it was like an angry gold medal, I think is the best way to describe it. Yeah,
there was a lot of emotion in that, and what was amazing, so the Italian athlete Francesca Porciolato, who was in the race, we'd known each other a really long time, and we were warming up together before the 100, and she'd won a medal in the 8, and she came up and she was like, "You're all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm all right, yeah." And she's like, "You can have a good day today." And it's like, "Oh, I don't know." And she's like, "Just, you'll have a good day." And she had the most amazing start, and 10 metres in, she's like a chair length up on all of us, and then I just gradually pulled her in, and what was amazing was afterwards, she was the first athlete to come up to congratulate me. And she just said to me, I told you you'd have a good day. And that I find that really, really emotional, that she did that. And then we came off the track and you go through it's called the mix zone where all the interview guys are. And her husband was her coach, Dino. And he just came up to me and gave me a hug. And that was just really kind, really, really kind. I still get really quite emotional about it. Because again, he didn't have to do that, but that was just lovely.
Yeah, and nice moment, and then another gold medal followed, and it was for your final Paralympics. It was a nice way to go out.
Yeah, it was. I remember. So the timetable had been changed while we're at the games, and normally events don't move. But yeah, it was. It was a really nice way to finish. I remember at that point, just being in the stadium thinking. I don't think I articulated it to anybody at the time, but I just remember thinking, this is my last Paralympics. Okay, enjoy the moment because this is there'll be other, there might be a Worlds, or probably another Commonwealth Games, but this is the last time I'll be in GB kit at a Paralympics.
And like you said, you did go back to another Worlds in 2006, and you won what, a gold, silver, and a bronze. Was there not a little bit of a Beijing's only 2 years away, or were you done with that?
I decided sort of through that season that I was going to retire at the Worlds in 2006, and then I'd actually been sick most of that season, and I just struggled to get training blocks together, and I think I was mentally and physically done, kind of broken. I was my elbows used to hurt for the first 2 hours every morning, and then training numbed them out. And then you're thinking, actually, the pain numbing out is not good. And I didn't take painkillers because I don't like the idea of taking painkillers. I just remember sort of in that season thinking, I just don't want to do this anymore. I'd kind of fallen out of love with the sport. And, with my coaching group and, the team, we had lots of discussions about whether I do 2007, whether I try, or whether I, there were people in my coaching group who felt really strongly that I could actually go with a decent break. I could actually go to Beijing and win, but that it was gone in me. It was that drive that I had to compete was gone, and you can't make yourself do all the horrible stuff you need to do if that drive is gone. So in the end, I was really sick going into the Worlds. So my first race was the 100s, where the team doctor nearly pulled me out, and I just said, look, okay, like I'm not. The decisions you make at the end of your career are different from the ones you would make at 20. And I just said to him, look, I'll do the 100s and then I'll decide what to do. And he's like, I don't think so. So I did it, and then we decided I could do the rest of the event. But I decided just before that was that I'd do one more race in the UK in early 2007, so I could have all my family around me to retire. So I could kind of just go, right, okay, my dad was getting on a bit and my sister, and they weren't at the Worlds, and I decided to do one more race to just, I guess, control my exit from the sport.
Well, yeah, not a lot of athletes get to choose when they retire and have it a grand farewell, so that must have been nice. And then in terms of Beijing, I guess you then went in front of the camera as a pundit. Do you enjoy being a television pundit and commentator?
Yeah, I do. Because you get to sit right on the finish line of the 100 metres and watch every single bit of athletics. It's amazing. But also, you have to do a huge amount of prep for it. And if you get someone's personal best wrong by 100th of a second, there will be someone who'll know, and they go, well, I think you'll find, people don't always like what you say about their performances. And it's difficult, it is difficult if you're saying, actually, I don't think that's the best race they could have done. I was really lucky. I had my family around to tell me that all the time. So I had a lot of practice at that. So some of it's not, it's tiring. It's more tiring commentating than it is competing. But to be there, to be part of the team, to be part of the commentary team it is a huge amount of fun. So basically my job is I'm a co-commentator. So basically my job is to fill space when the commentator needs a break. And my job is to know lots of just stuff. So we'd had a technical problem one day, and it was me and Steve Cram. And I think the question he asked me was, tell me about the history of the Paralympics. So I started in 1947 and did it year by year, and until we'd sorted out that it was a minor technical issue, got sorted. And I remember my sister sending me a text message saying, that was so boring. Because I was doing 48, 49. And I said, yeah, but that my job is to talk and fill space and hopefully be interesting. But, and it's a lot of fun.
And just in terms of the Beijing Paralympics, that was obviously a bit of a moment for China, I think. I don't think they were really ready. Well, disability wasn't really a thing, apparently, in China, but then the Paralympics were quite well received. The games were amazing in terms of they just really embraced it. And, if you look to 2004, which was the first time that China really sent a significant team, they topped the medal table. And I think they decided that, the team that was selected for Athens was pretty much athletes from the greater Beijing area. That is a population of over 80 million people. 80, it's pretty big. So it really kick-started what they were doing. And, by games time, they decided to make their tube stations accessible. So they were. They put in tactile paving. They put in drop curbs. They did loads to embrace the games. A lot of people came to watch. And I was very lucky. I was there for the Olympics and the Paralympics. I'd first been to China in 2005. So even in that time, it's seen like a huge amount of change in attitude and in terms of accessibility. It was an important time for the Paralympics. And Karis had come out to the Olympics with me. And it was so sweet. And, those sort of horrible essays that kids have to write when they start back. So she was 6. And the essay she wrote was, in the summer, Mummy made me go to the Olympics. And you go, you ungrateful child. And we've got that. And so now she's sort of 18. She's like, I can't believe it. Like she does recognise, how privileged she is. But at 6, again, as 6, she thought that's just what everybody did. Like, no, it's not. And then in terms of the Paralympic as a whole, again, London was obviously a huge moment for the Paralympic movement, not just in terms of attendance, but I think a lot of attitudes changed towards. I watched the Rising Phoenix documentary on Netflix the other day, which is great if anyone hasn't seen it. And I think Johnny Peacock said before London, every interview he'd ever done had the question, how did you lose your leg?
Yeah.
And then around London, it changed to, oh, who's your main rival? How's training going? What's the race going to be like? It turned into more about the sport than the people. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, London was good. I mean, there were lots of things with London, so it was an inclusive bid right from the beginning. I was involved with the team from about 2002. I think the moment that Barbara Cassani, who had been leading the bid, stood back and Seb Coe came in to chair it, he put athletes at the heart of the games, both Olympians and Paralympians. And so there were lots of things that weren't accidental in terms of that. The ticketing policy was the Olympic tickets went on sale first, built this huge sort of raft of interest, and then they put the Paralympic tickets on sale. And so there were lots of things that were very well done. And I remember going in on the first day, and I worked on both games for the media, for BBC, and going in on the first day of athletics at the Paralympics, and it was packed. I mean, this is for like semis and first, not edge of your seat stuff sometimes, and it was like, this is full. Wow. And what was amazing, so Greg, who produced and made the Rising Phoenix video, he'd worked on the 2012 games, and then he was part of, when we realised there were challenges with Rio, he kind of stepped in and did a huge amount to get tickets sold, and then he did this film. And I think it's important, some people do have dramatic backstories and some don't, and some do who are Olympians. And I think for me what's really important is that there's a human interest side to lots of people in sport, but when they're competing, when they're on the field of play, it should be sport, it should be nothing else. And I think that's important. But what we see creeping in a little bit is something which is called inspiration porn, and which is about how disabled people are all brave and marvellous, and just because of their impairment. And it's really difficult when you talk about that with sport, because it's not that people don't want to be inspirational, but it's been inspirational for the right things, for this amazing sporting performance, not necessarily because they got out of bed, because there's people who really struggle to get out of bed in the mornings, but, I don't. So we still got a bit of a way to go to kind of talk about sport and sort of nothing else.
And then, as mentioned in that documentary, the build-up to Rio was a little bit tense with are they going to cancel it because they spent all the money on the Olympics, and that was a bit of a mess. But actually, in the end, more people attended the Olympic Park for the Paralympics than the Olympics, which turned out to be quite an amazing stat, really. So how do you think Rio went for the Paralympic movement?
It was one of those, I think for the athletes, it was good, and the competition was amazing. And, we saw fantastic performances from British athletes, which is what you want to see. I think the build-up was quite hard, because I think, the games were really up in the air for a long time. And it was good to see so many people come to watch. There were definitely days where, there were a lot more people in the athletics venue for the Paralympics than the Olympics. So I think it just shows the way people perceive and understand and want to watch the Paralympics. And, working there was great. It was, in terms of accessibility, so where we were staying, there weren't that many restaurants around. And, this is such a minor thing, but all the restaurants had sort of high tables where you stood up to eat. And the first day we went into one restaurant, and so I ended up sitting with a plate of food on my knee, not a problem. And the next day we went to the restaurant, the owner had bought a little table so that I could stick my plate on the table. And it's like, God, that's really sweet. That's inclusive and, reasonable adjustment, whatever you want to call it. And then the next night we went to eat at the restaurant across the road. And then the owner of the first restaurant took the little table across to the second restaurant. And you're like, wow, and that's such a tiny thing. But you go, do you know what? That is cool. So I think, they learned a lot from being there. So, it's each cycle brings different challenges. It's the same, when we bid for London, we couldn't have predicted the stock market crash in 2008. When Rio bid for the Games, they were in a completely and utterly different financial position from the one they were in the lead up to the Games. So, because you apply 7 years out or you bid 7 years out, a lot can happen in those 7 years, which is difficult for the movement.
And then looking ahead, Tokyo hopefully will do a good job, and then Paris, and then hopefully by the time we get to LA, it won't be the same as Atlanta, and things will have moved on a little bit. How do you feel, especially in America, we've mentioned how, they are quite well received, but at the same time the TV coverage is a little bit sparse sometimes. Is that something that they need to improve on?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue that they need to improve their Olympic coverage as well, because if you're ever in the States when the Olympics is on, they only ever show the American athletes. So it's hard to get a feel for the whole of their coverage. I mean, there has been more coverage in the last sort of 2 cycles, but I've always said, you crack North America, then it takes the Paralympics to a different stage in terms of, sort of global activity. So, the games need to be, shown all over the world. And that will impact other media coverage. It'll impact sponsorship. My aspiration in athletics in the 80s, the sign that you'd made it as an athlete, you'd got, it was like $1 million a year shoe contract. And I kind of knew that wasn't going to happen in my career, and it's certainly not happened in any Paralympian's career yet. But that's kind of the mark that we've made it, when it's equality of coverage, equality of sponsorship, and inclusion. I think there's lots of debates we could have about whether we can make World Championships inclusive. You've got the Commonwealth Games, or Europeans, or there's lots of things there that those events don't necessarily have to be separate. So I think there's lots of opportunities for athletes going forward.
And just in terms of the actual level of competition, since your day, how much has it improved?
It's quite variable, to be honest. I mean, I think, when I was young, there were loads of girls doing wheelchair racing because there was a special school system that sort of existed, but there weren't the opportunities necessarily to go on to compete at a higher level. So I think those opportunities there. The competition always moves on in terms of times and performances. That's moved on. But I still don't think we've probably got enough of a pyramid. We need more people. So we're doing okay at the moment feeding our elite pathway. We need more people doing sport who are just not very good at sport. And that's where I think we're missing, is that the club level athlete, someone who trains 2 or 3 or 4 nights a week, who does it because they love it and want to improve and maybe have aspiration. But we need that bottom rung, and because actually ultimately we need it for the long-term development of elite sport. As a national team, we're in pretty good place, which is good. It's just, you kind of always worry about, what the next couple of cycles are going to look like. And we do know that disabled young people don't have, or don't feel they have, the same opportunity to do sport and physical activity. So that's what we've got to work hard to change. And
just in terms of your personal career, you in your prime, where do you think you'd rank today in 2020 if you were competing?
That's a really difficult one to answer. I kind of hope that I think I'd probably still be up there. I don't know.
I mean, has the technology changed enough since your day?
No, it has. I mean, there's changes in design, and some of the chairs are built a bit differently. I was kind of lucky. I had access to sort of some of the cutting edge technology at the time, so I hope I'd still have access to that. No, I think I'd kind of hope that I'd still be pretty competitive, that you kind of step up to what's around you. So I don't know. The one thing I do know is I'm not about to try, so I do know that.
Yeah. Moving on to your 5th and final defining moment, and that was in 2010 when you joined the House of Lords. First of all, how does that happen?
So as a crossbencher, there's generally an interview process. You're interviewed by colleagues, and so I was nominated by somebody else, and I got invited for interview, and it's a 2-hour-ish interview, which is pretty challenging. And then you're told that if they decide that, they'll either give you a straight no, or you just might not hear from them. I still remember the moment when I found out I'd made it through the interview process. Karis had come home from school, and at about 7:30, she was like, "Mum, I need green felt for tomorrow." And wow. Like, you didn't tell me at 4:30. So we sort of charge off to the local shopping centre. We're in a shop. She's looking at something else. I'm screaming at her like a fishwife to just go and buy green felt, just buy a piece of every green felt. Because she's like, "Oh, I don't think I like." And I get an email, and it just said at Friday, 10 o'clock, it'll be announced you're going into the House of Lords. It's like, okay. So I showed Ian, and he was like, "Oh, okay." not to impress. I rang my dad and was like, Dad, I'm in. And he said, before you get too excited, make sure they've got the right Tanni Grey-Thompson. I've got an unusual name, it's okay. And then I thought I'd done a really good job explaining to Karis. And when I picked Karis up from school on Friday, she said, can I tell my teacher? Yeah, you can. And her teacher said to me, oh, well done in your new job, but it's a shame it's in London. But if you work really hard, you might be able to get promoted back to Darlington. I was like, I can't, I can only do it in London. She said, oh, you're always telling the girls to like aim high and to, you could get promoted back. And I said, what did she tell you I was doing? And Karis told her I had a job collecting tickets at Westminster Tube Station. So I was like, no, I'm not. Anyway, so I suppose my family are very grounding. So, and then, you come and it's an interesting life, it's a hard life. Very conscious that I'm electing to be away from my family because of what I choose to do. But also there's an opportunity to change legislation, to try and, improve stuff. I do a lot of disability rights work. My job is, I see it's to try and, make sure there's equality of opportunity and disabled people experience less discrimination, because there's still quite a lot of discrimination against disabled people. And I just think there shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, you often see on especially on social media, I've seen Sophie Christensen talk about trying to get on a train and things like that. Sometimes it's the simple things that are harder to solve in a way.
Yeah, I mean, so actually one of the things when the Disabilities Discrimination Act came out, January the 1st, 2020, trains were meant to be accessible. And they've kind of slightly missed that. But I was in a meeting in January and somebody said to me, oh, Tanni, you just need to be patient. I was like, no. You told me in 1996 I need to be patient. I have been patient. I am done with being patient. So, I mean, what's been amazing with social media is that there's now a group, we're not a formal group, we're just a group of, disabled people who've come across each other either in real life or on social media. And when we have sort of experiences, we tweet and we campaign, and there's lots of stuff going on. And, there's some big improvements. So, one of my, Karis calls them my train friends. And, Anthony, he's had just this big win recently where he's, and one of the train companies has got the policy changed to allow people who use scooters to go on that train company. And you go, wow, so in that bit, us coming together in different ways has changed lots of stuff for the better, but there's still loads to do.
And what would you say in your 10 years in the House of Lords, what's been your biggest achievement that you feel like you've achieved?
That's quite hard because actually the stuff I work on is hard to win votes on. So there has been sort of policies that I've influenced and changed. There's probably stuff that I've done because I'm here that I've been able to work on some of the train accessibility and getting companies to think differently about how they treat disabled people. It's much harder to identify the kind of the wins. In sport, it's dead easy. It's a medal or not. And then, you have your own sort of thing beneath that. It's much harder to sort of pinpoint in politics where those positives come, which doesn't affect my motivation. But yeah, there are times when you think, am I actually making a difference? And then you maybe get an email from someone to say, thank you for doing this because it's changed what I'm able to do. And you go, okay, right, that's good. And you kind of go back and try and do more of that.
Have you always been interested in politics? I guess ever since your dad said sign these papers when you were a kid. I mean, has it always been there throughout your life? Yeah,
I've always been interested in politics, not so much party politics, which actually as a crossbencher, as an independent. I like, again, it's being in charge of my own destiny, choosing how I vote and whether I vote or don't vote. Not having to be answerable to anybody is quite important to me. So how the politics have changed and how you affect change and how you influence has always been really interesting. And then actually at university I did a politics degree, but actually said at uni that I would never go into politics because that's for losers. And then 20 years later, someone from my department, when it was announced, sent me an email. I went, loser. Yeah, thanks, okay. But I think it was like an evolution of becoming interested in duty of care, how athletes were treated, funding support, athletes' rights, and then disability rights. So my kind of family, my dad would have said, apparently he told me when I was 21, that I was going to end up in politics and in the Lords. I don't remember him saying that. But my family would probably say, yeah, this is where I was going to end up.
And just back to sport for a sec. 2019, end of last year, you received this Lifetime Achievement Award on sports personality. Was that a nice moment just to kind of sit back and take stock of what you've achieved during your career?
Yeah, it was really emotional. So again, I'd watched sports personality from being a really young child, and then you'd seen these people win the Lifetime Achievement Award, and maybe you knew some of them or didn't know some of them. And actually, I remember as a young athlete thinking some of them were really old. And then, actually my sister said to me, yeah, you're one of the old people now. I was like, okay. But no, it was really kind. It was lovely. The one thing I think with my career is that I didn't stop that often to enjoy the moment, because it was like, what's the next thing I've got to do? I've got to be back in training. I've got to be faster. I need to be better than I was last time. And I think actually that's one of the things that sort of made me good as an athlete. Yeah, it was kind of just very sweet to see like everything packaged up and put together. And for me, it was important to try and say thank you, because there's so many people that have helped me through my career. And one of the reasons actually for me retiring at a race in Manchester was I organised a dinner where I just invited people who'd helped me in my career that they maybe might not have realised they'd helped me in my career, but I wanted to say to them, thank you for what you've done. Because it's not just your training group and your coaches. It's so much bigger than that. So for me, it's you're kind of a sum of lots of different people's efforts. I'm probably the one that you get the recognition for it, but I couldn't have done it without loads of other people. So for me, it was just, hopefully I got to say thank you to enough people to recognise what they've done for me.
Yeah, and obviously, as we discussed, quite a lot of defining moments during your career. I'm just going to ask you to pick one of the five, if you can. So the first one was obviously going to a mainstream school. Second one was realising that basketball wasn't the sport for you. Third one was Atlanta and the expectation you had. And then the fourth one was your daughter being born. And the final one, joining the House of Lords. If you had to pick one, which would be the one defining moment?
Caris being born.
Yeah.
Because it kind of... Yeah, it's irritating, difficult, challenging. One day she eats peas, the next day she says she's never eaten a pea in her life. But it provided me with focus in my sporting career, and it's focus now. I realised I was very lucky that I had an amazing family, and thinking about her life and her aspirations and what she wants to do and how she's able to do it, that gives me a lot of focus for what I do now. And she's amazing, and she's lovely, and she's kind, and there is nobody that annoys me more than her. And I have the ability, without even looking at her, to annoy her as well. But we're very close, and she kind of is my child. So sometimes I look at her and just go, "That's me." And so I kind of feel the need to go and apologise to my family for quite a lot of stuff. But I think I'm very lucky. She's an amazing young woman.
When did she realise that who her mum was and how many medals she'd won and how all that kind of stuff?
Do you know, I probably wouldn't ask her, does she know how many medals I've won? Because I'm not sure if she knows. She knows, probably really young, in that she noticed that people treated me differently. And especially sort of around London games, which are amazing. Lots of people come up, can have your photograph taken. And when she was small, I was very protective of her having a photo taken, that I didn't want her photo to be taken with me for lots of reasons. And she'd kind of just walk off when someone sort of came towards me with a phone in their hands. But I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's not sort of a conversation that you ever have. And I did say to her once, is it weird, because I'm an athlete or because I'm a wheelchair user, or is there anything that's sort of like that you think is different? And she was probably about 6, and she said, yeah, it's really bad. And I was expecting this whole thing. I was like, oh, guilt again. And she said, mummies are meant to be taller than their daughters. And at that point, she was taller than me. And she said, and you can't give me a piggyback. You go, what's okay? And I said, is that it? And she went, yeah. Okay, so I got a mate to give her a piggyback. It's not the sort of conversation we have. We just sort of get on with it. And I just try not to be too embarrassing. And I think I fail at that quite a lot. So dropping off at university, I was told what I was allowed to wear and stuff like that. And actually, that's just a normal mum-daughter relationship. So as long as I don't embarrass her too much, I think I'm okay.
You don't have your 16 Paralympic medals just out there on display whenever her friends come round?
Nah. no. If you actually came to our house, you wouldn't know that either of us have been athletes. So that's probably not a bad thing, to be honest.
Okay, just a few more questions, which I ask everyone who I speak to on this podcast. Do the low points of your career always help out the high points and vice versa? I guess we kind of touched on that with Athens, but that kind of journey, is that something that you've always enjoyed?
The low points are pretty miserable when you're going through them, but it gives you context for the high points. And the high points aren't real either. So you kind of need to be somewhere in the middle. So there's lots of things I wouldn't change about my career. There's probably some things that I might have done differently or handled in a different way, but you kind of learn from each of those sort of times that you have. So again, I'm very lucky I have people around me who are very good at when it's hard, helping me, and when it's good, just providing that balance. But yeah, it's you hopefully they outweigh each other in the end.
And that kind of leads me on to my next question, which would be, would you do anything differently if you could? Would you do any races differently if you could?
The 800 in Athens, no. I mean, it was bad. I mean, it's a long time ago, and I still get asked about it, and I still get people come go, that race was awful. Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't mean, because actually if someone comes and go, yeah, it was, and but no, because it taught me a lot of stuff. So there's probably a few rows with team managers that I might have done differently. But you kind of have to own up to what you do and what you say. And I had somebody in sport who said to me that becoming an athlete and a mother would make me soft. And so my response was, let me stuff a bowling ball inside you, slash it out with a knife and see if you're training 2 weeks later. And apparently that was considered rude, which actually kind of was. But do I regret it? No, not really. I got a bit of a slap on the wrist for that one, but he shouldn't have said it. So there we go. Yeah.
And next question: what would you say to that young Tanni, that young girl who was starting out in life, and what would any advice you'd give her?
Enjoy the moment and believe in yourself. I'm quite good at thinking of all the things I'm not so good at, and that made me a good athlete as well, because you need to work on the things that you're not good at. I was really good at pushing downhill fast, but there aren't many races which are just a downhill race. So, believe in yourself and be committed to the things that you want to do. Learn to shut up a bit. Learn to not be so gobby about things. But own it. Yeah, when you do it, own it.
Okay, and finally, just thinking about everything we've discussed today, what does sport mean to you, and what does it mean to you in your life?
It's a massive part of my life, like through, competing, watching. It's given me, the opportunity to test myself, to push myself, to be, some of the best and most miserable moments in my entire life, and to challenge me in a way that I might not have done if I'd been in another career. And it's always there. It's always, thinking about what we can do different in sport, how can we run differently, how we can give opportunities for people to be physically active. It's part of every single day of my life. And whether it's me going to the gym or, going out on my bike, or in my head I can still sprint the way I used to. I know I can't. It's kind of been everything for me.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been great to kind of go over everything on and off the track. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wasn't that great? It was really interesting to hear about Tanni's life and career, both on and off the track. So thank you so much for doing that, Baroness. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it, you can subscribe and follow the podcast. I'd also really appreciate your comments, so you can rate and review. And if you do have any feedback, you can also email me, chris@ChrisBrownSport.com. The pod is also now available on Amazon Music. So if you have an Alexa, you can just say, Alexa, play My Defining Moments podcast, and you will hear me. Plus, it's also available on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. You can also find it on my YouTube channel and find me on social media at ChrisBrownSport. I'll be back very soon with many more episodes of My Defining Moments.